So I got the car moved out of its permanent parking spot here. It's usually almost always parked right here. Has actually been for the last 25 years. Crazy, right? I've never seen this garage without this car in it. So anyways, here is the Mustang IRS setup that we got. It's off a 2017 Mustang with 11,000 miles. So we're gonna make this work in there. It's gonna be pretty gnarly. Now the only thing that sucks about this is we already got this rear end in here. These wheels and tires fit perfect. And the underside has already been all painted with Pour 15, and you can see it's dusty, but it's all been done. They've added some cross members, brand new springs. Everything in here is brand new. But it's gonna have to come out because it's just not quite cool enough. So it's about time to start on that. So what I'm gonna first start out with is just some measurements. So I'm gonna get a bunch of measurements of the height of the body right now in certain spots. And what I usually do, so I don't forget or lose a piece of paper, you can see that sometimes I'll just write stuff right on the body here with Sharpie. Harry! 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 Alright, so we got this 40 Chevy here jacked up, and I got the tires off of Wild Torquey, wheels and tires, because of the same bolt pattern. All I had to do was take off the brake calipers so that the wheel would fit, because these are a small wheel, they're only a 15. And now what I'm doing is I'm rolling this up in there and taking it back and forth, and what I actually have to do right now is trim off some more of this bracket I trimmed off. There's a little tab right here, right there. That was on here. I had to trim that off, but I'm still gonna end up having to trim off more of this body mount here, which is fine because I'm not gonna use it. So I'm gonna trim that off like so, and then it will allow this to come up in between the frame rails, the original frame rails on the car. So one thing that deciphers good work from, I guess, crappy work is taking your time and laying out stuff. What I'm doing here is I'm cutting this off. So instead of just blindly cutting, this is just a little thing. I mean, it all adds up, but just taking this, putting it on the edge of here, making sure the line is square, and then marking it with this scribe. Now all it does is it leaves a scribe line so I can get a cut, and it'll be nice and straight afterwards. So that's just a little thing that you must do in order to build something of quality. You can see here that there is that cut started, so basically I cut the top side and then I spun this whole assembly over. But you can see that I actually can't get a cutoff wheel in there because of the way this is all set up. So what I'm gonna do, quick and easy, Milwaukee hacksaw, battery operated with the torch blade, which is for metal, and it's just an easy way to quickly do it. So here is where the upper control arm comes on this frame. I notched out, you can see I notched out that lip, but I'm actually going to need to take a little bit more out. So what I did here was I measured about what I thought it would be. So it's going to be 1.25 inches tall this way, and 1.25 inches tall this way, or 1.25 inches this way. Just enough to clear this arm. So it's nothing crazy, but that's what it is. So I need to cut a piece of tubing that's going to be the right width for this opening here. So all it is, if I'm trying to figure out how long of tubing I need, which goes diagonal like this, all it is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So it's basic geometry, Pythagorean's theorem. So if I want to go 1.25 inch on each side, do it on the little calculator here, 1.25 times 1.25 equals, now I can just multiply that by 2 because it's the same, and then I take the square root of that, square root of 3.125. Now the square root of that is 1.76, so that means the longest side, so you have, pretend there's a right angle, and then the triangle, the longest side is going to be 1.765 inches long. So that is how long of a tube that I need to cut. So just call it 1 3/4 out of here. So I'm going to need to cut 1 3/4 here, and then split it this way, and that will give me a notch for each side. So here I got a hole saw. The shape it'll actually need to be is going to be an ellipse but I'm gonna use a hole saw anyways. Now you can see that this is a fairly large size hole saw, and if you look here, I'm only taking out, if you remember, 1.25 inches of the frame, so I actually had to take and weld on this little tab here. It's just a piece of, I don't know, 1/8 inch, anything you can weld on there, and that hole is what actually keeps this hole saw centered. So that's just a little trick. I'm doing that on this side, and then as soon as that little frame piece is broken off, I can do it from the underside as well. This right here is the original IRS mount off of the 2017 Mustang axle. Now I cut these ones off because they're in the way, but the ones on the front of the axle crossmember will actually mount up pretty good to this original frame using these brackets here. Now what I'm doing is, usually there's like a rubber sort of bushing in here with the bolt, but I don't have those, and I'd rather have this more solid mounted so it doesn't flex. So what I'm doing, I'm using this as my test piece. What I had here was some 1¼ inch OD, just light wall tubing, and these are actually 1.2, so I had to take off 50 thousandths, so I just ground them down till it fits. There we go. So that fits in there tight. Notice it only goes down about 1.5 inches, and then the last inch or so is a press fit, so when it's all tightened together it'll press fit. Now I have another thicker sleeve for the inside. Now this one goes inside this tube like so you can see that's in there. Then here is a 5/8 fine thread nut. Take it off. This is just a shock mounting bracket, but I'm just using this nut for demonstration purposes. So you can see this nut here is going to go inside here, sort of like so. Okay, so now this side will go inside of the bracket here. It's all going to be welded together, and there will be this washer on top here, so it'll pull tight against this body mount. I guess it's hard to explain, but this is what I'm doing. It's just got a few pieces to it. So here's the structural component of that insert. Now this has the thick washer, the bolt that's basically just welded in there if this happens to pop loose or not be friction fit like I expect it to be, and then this bigger nut which is welded in there, and I welded it in there with the bolt in the hole so the threads didn't deform. Now I have this here. So basically all I have to do is grind down these welds, slide this over, and then I can weld this collar onto this assembly. Basically all this is here is a friction sleeve. So there's a little bit of a taper to this. So on the bottom here it's a little bit smaller, on the top it's a little larger. So as it presses in, it'll press in tighter and tighter. Not bad using what I had. Ideally I would have had a piece of solid stock and a lathe, and I would have laid this down, and then I could have just tapped the end. Did some sort of tap and a bolt on this end also, but I don't have a lathe and I didn't have any solid stock, so using what I had, this will work out pretty tits. What do you think of this music? Alright guys, so I've done a little bit of work since I've talked last or shown you kind of what I'm doing. So I'm just going to give you a basic rundown on what I did. So here you can see these are the original bushing style ends that used to attach this subframe to the unibody of the Mustang. Well, what I did was I cut off the end here, and you can see that I actually had to pivot it. That's so it could line up with the frame. My frame goes up like this, okay, and before it wouldn't have fit so well, so I cut that, spun it, tacked it all on when everything was underneath the car. All the brackets are all bolted together, everything. So now I took this out and I'm welding up these ends. This was an open end here because when you spun it, there was obviously less material here, so I had to cut a little piece of pie, metal out of a pie. Yeah, tastes good, metal pie. And then that's welded in. Now you can see that's a straight, and that looks kind of ugly like that. I think I could grind it down and make it look better, but what I'm actually gonna do, here is a piece of tube. This is a piece of roll cage tubing that I cut into quarters, sort of. Another piece of pie, sort of. You can see that will go in there, and that'll sort of blend this in nicer. And then I'll have another straight gusset after the saw ground that comes down from here all the way down to here. So it will look sort of like this gusset, but this direction. So it'll all look a little bit better. This side here you can see I got that little piece of tube welded in there. Grind it down, roll this edge a bit, and it'll look pretty nice. Here I just welded that, and I'll just grind it smooth. This is probably overkill, but I want to make sure it's done right. I'm using my Arc 1 speed lens. Man, I love this thing. Obviously, I beat the shit out of it. I use this thing a lot, almost every day. A little solar 110 welder. I need a frickin' bigger welder. This is only 110. I keep blowing the breakers. You see the emergency lights on because I actually just blew the breaker. Alright, so I rolled this axle over and then spun it around, so I have these mounting pads back on this side to work. You can see here that there's this big old gap here. Now, what would you usually do, or what would you think to do to fix that? Would you just plate it up, or would you splice this and pound it down so it's smooth? Well, I've elected to slice it and pound it down so it's smooth. Here's another tip. Now, I cut that slice out of there, and I started pounding these down. Now, if you look in here close, you can see that those are overlapping. So now, what I do is I take a cutoff wheel, and all I have to do is cut basically anywhere on this piece and cut all the way through, and it'll leave a gap the size of the cutoff wheel for weld penetration. So that's how you do that. Cut it away, pound it smooth, and it's pretty easy. You can do it pretty quick. Now before I weld this, I don't know if you can tell, but you see that there's a cut in here, and then I also beveled the edges a little bit so I can get some good penetration, so I can grind this smooth and not lose any strength and make it look good. Whoop whoop. Dude, I am so fucking pumped. This thing looks fucking sick. Looks pretty good, huh?
Fucking badass! Ooh, Bubby, I just got goosebumps.
The general rule, the lower the PSI, the softer your ride is going to be. So, if you think about it just in terms of area,